Something does not feel right, because thousands of Wagner soldiers are already in Ukraine and the rest of Russian forces are concentrating mainly in one specific area. And even the Ministry of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, he was recently tasked with an impossible mission. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's go straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. So, recently, in some of Russian schools, they introduced new alphabets. These small books where you learn the letters. And it is very special military operation oriented. And just for example, A stands for the army, where everyone needs to go and sacrifice their life for their motherland. V stands for veteran, the veteran of the special military operation. H stands for hero, a person who sacrifices his life for the greater good of the nation. And P obviously stands for the president, the one and only leader of our one true nation. And just as a reminder, yes, this is a book for elementary school kids. My question now is, what do you think stands for the letter SHA? Because I honestly think it stands for Shoigu, annoying mosquito. Come here, you little troublemaker. And trust me guys, I do everything possible to protect you from this annoying creature. But unfortunately, some of you might already have Shoigu mosquito flying in your houses. But here is the solution. If you want to join the Russian dude army and receive my own personal protection, you need to do just please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's it. It's that easy. You can also follow me on Instagram to see how I live outside of YouTube. The link is down below. But okay, jokes aside, now let's talk about this impossible mission that Sergei Shoigu got tasked recently. Then I'll give you a very quick update from the east and the south of Ukraine before talking about the situation with Wagner. And so, long story short, according to the Institute for the Study of War, which refers to their sources within Putin's inner circle inside Kremlin, the president of Russia recently tasked the Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, to stop Ukrainian counteroffensive before October, which by the way ends this week. So basically by the end of the week. But wait a second, it is not just that. Besides stopping Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russians must also regain the initiative along the front line, even if it costs significant expenses. And just please let me know in the comments whether do you think Shoigu will be able to achieve this in approximately 5 to 6 days. And to make things even more complicated to him, President Zelensky already acknowledged that the first batch of American M1 Abrams tanks already arrived to the country. Besides that, Ukrainians also started actively testing its underwater drone called Marichka, which is capable of destroying the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And even before they started using this particular drone, Russian Black Sea Fleet already started experiencing very big problems. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And besides that, Ukrainians received brand new surveillance equipment called Surveil Spire. And the best thing about this is that you can place these so-called turrets with cameras and you don't even need to be close to them. The operators can be dozens of kilometers away from these installations and still be able to track all the movements of the enemy, the Russian soldiers, both during the daylight and at night time, thanks to its infrared and nighttime vision. And so what it basically means is that Ukrainians will be much easier to launch the subsequent counteroffensive, having much more intelligence data, and also it will be also much easier to protect existing territories, because you do not simply need to leave your sentries. Everything is already remotely controlled. But okay, now let's briefly talk about the situation in the east of Ukraine, where Russians came with another ridiculous way of protecting Bakhmut, and then I'll give you a quick update from the south of the country. And first of all, during the last couple of days, Ukrainians were able to attack a Russian airfield located in Kursk and reportedly even eliminated a commander of Russian air forces, one of his deputies, some FSB representatives, and several other high-ranking officials. Obviously, Russians did not report much on this incident. Next, we once again refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that there are still daily combat activities between Russians and Ukrainians along Kupiansk-Svatove-Crimea front line, and then, already according to the Ukrainian side, they were able to destroy a pretty big ammunition depot of Russians located next to Kuzyomivka. In addition to that, also allegedly along the eastern front lines, Ukrainians were able to achieve a significant precision during one of the most recent drone attacks. This video is truly a masterpiece. The Ukrainian drone operator avoids all the potential nets and whatever Russians were trying to install, trying to intercept this drone, but they failed. And the drone successfully reached its final destination. The video is definitely worth a watch. But unfortunately, Russians also do sometimes successful things, such as, for example, in one of recent days, they were able to ambush a convoy of Ukrainian military vehicles with one of their guided bombs. And then right here is the video from Klishchiivka, where combat activities, especially in its eastern part, they still continue. And basically what's happening is that Russians are trying to escape from Ukrainian wrath, but they could not escape Ukrainian artillery. And yes, guys, I apologize for the inconvenience. YouTube still forces me to censor this kind of footage. Because of them, looks like I recently started to specifically targeting my channel. But if you want to see the fully uncensored footage episodes and also support the channel as low as $4 for the entire month, please go ahead and check my Patreon. There is 1 week of free access for you to see if you like it or not. The link is down below. And also, speaking about Bakhmut area, looks like Russians came up with the new genius way to try and protect the city from Ukrainian drones, so they just installed these nets next to these light posts. It more looks like some kind of volleyball nets, rather than the actual drone protection. But what do I know about the military tactics of Russians? And just as a result of these combat activities during the last couple of days, Ukrainians were able to liberate just a little bit more territory between Klishchiivka and Adriivka, and then as you go to the north of Bakhmut, they took back some territory next to the Orikhovo-Vasilievka, as you can see from this map. But wait, there is more, because Ukrainians were able to somehow incredibly mysteriously and maybe even lucky destroy a big ammunition warehouse of Russians located next to Krasnodon, as you can see from this video, and as you can see from this map, it is located extremely far from the active front lines. And in addition to that, as we go to Mariupol, allegedly partisans were able to target and destroy a Russian transformator which was supplying Russian military bases in this city with electricity. And just like with the previous city Krasnodon, Mariupol is located extremely far behind the front lines. But as you can see, Russians are not safe there either. Right, and now let me give you a similar quick update from the south. And our first stop brings us to Odessa, which once again unfortunately has been targeted by Russian missiles, and one of the civilian infrastructure that has been destroyed was the local hotel in Odessa. It was reportedly abandoned by Ukrainians, both civilians and military people, long time ago, but nevertheless Russians still decided to target it. And in just one single night, Russians launched reportedly at least 33 aerial targets against Odessa, but Ukrainians fortunately were able to intercept 30 of them. Besides that, Russians also launched several attacks against this small city in Kherson region called Bereslav, and unfortunately one civilian was eliminated. But luckily in the last 24 hours, Ukrainian air defense was able to intercept all 19 Russian Shahed drones and 11 out of 12 caliber missiles. And here is a very important map which shows where statistically the majority of Russian missiles and drones come from the territory of Russia and which areas of Ukraine they do target. But Ukrainians, they obviously do respond themselves, such as for example last night, reportedly Storm Shadow missiles along with some other missiles by Ukrainians were launched against Crimea and also specifically against Sevastopol, and Russians got scared so much that they even had to lift in the air their entire air fleet of their planes and helicopters located on any of the Crimean airfields. But nevertheless, some of the attacks by Ukrainians, they did reach their final destinations, such as for example from this video, as you can see, which came to us from Sevastopol. And speaking about this notorious city, the local authorities, they started to demolish the remains of the Russian Black Sea Navy headquarters located in Sevastopol, which was previously attacked by Ukrainian Storm Shadow missiles. But obviously local authorities, they did not say that this is a full demolish. This is only the temporarily termination of some dangerous constructions. And by the way, yes, now it is confirmed that the commander of the Russian Black Sea Navy, Viktor Sobolev, was indeed eliminated as a result of this attack of the Russian headquarters in Sevastopol. Besides that, and this is pretty interesting, is that Russians started using naval multiple launch rocket systems called A-22 Огонь, and they started installing them on their armored personnel carriers, as you can see right here. But Ukrainians nevertheless were able to destroy this target, allegedly somewhere in Kherson region as well. And yet another Russian military warehouse has been destroyed in Novokakhovka, as you can see from this video. Couple of last words from the south of Ukraine before we can talk about this alarming situation around Wagner. And so right now let's make a quick stop in Robotyne frontline, where reportedly Ukrainians are strengthening their positions and gaining pretty confident foothold next to Novoprokopivka and next to Verbove. And as of right now, it is estimated that Ukrainians are only 6.5 kilometers away from the next major line of defense of Russians in the Zaporozhye region. Ukrainians were also reportedly be able to breach through defenses of Russians in Novoprokopivka, and some small separate units even entered the city. And pretty much the same reportedly happened in Verbove. But as you can see, unfortunately, as of right now, this city is still under occupied territory of Russia, once again, at least for now. And even though Ukrainians might not be actively advancing and liberating their territories, they still try to destroy Russian military infrastructure way to the south of these territories. Such as for example from this video, as you can see, Ukrainians destroyed another observation point of Russians in between Robotyne and Tokmak. And the significance of this event, it is because Russians are now a little bit more blind. Their reconnaissance and intelligence is not as good as before the destruction of this observation tower. And as a result of all of these combat activities, as you can see from this map, Ukrainians indeed established a partial control over Novoprokopivka. And as soon as the infantry enters the newly recaptured territories and starts gaining the foothold to be a little bit more confident, this is when Ukrainians start bringing their heavy military machinery, such as for example from this video, as you can see, there is an infantry combat fighting vehicle called Marder, which gets very close to the Zaporozhye front lines. And just in general, as of right now, Ukrainians were able to liberate 687 settlements since the beginning of Russian invasion back in February of last year. But unfortunately, there are still 2,804 settlements which needs to be liberated. So there is still a lot of work ahead. And this work, unfortunately, will become a little bit more complicated, because there are now more and more official at this point reports that Wagner indeed returns to Ukraine, such as for example the presence of Wagner soldiers in Belarus decreased from 6,000 to only 1,000 and is constantly declining, and there's a lot of Wagner smaller units already being spotted around Ukraine. One of the very first places where they appeared was next to Bakhmut frontline. And recently we even started having reports that a lot of, to be honest, thousands of Wagner soldiers started arriving closer to Kherson frontline, the frontline which has been relatively inactive since November of last year, which does look like that Russians are planning something. In addition to that, Russian conventional forces themselves, they started to concentrate in more specific areas, such as once again previously mentioned Zaporozhye and Bakhmut front lines. And just talking about the entire Wagner situation, there is a good and bad thing. The bad thing is that Wagner was pretty much the only military unit of Russian army which was capable at least of something. It was mainly thanks to Wagner that they were able to capture Bakhmut. But the good news is that the number of Wagner soldiers is not yet significant. It might be only up to, I would say, 5,000 soldiers scattered across the entire country. And taking into consideration that both Russians and Ukrainians, they have hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Ukraine, 5,000 Wagnerites will almost pretty much not have a significant impact unless they target one specific settlement after settlement after settlement. But at the same time, it is also heavily reported that these existing Wagner soldiers, they are signing the contracts with the Ministry of Defense of Russia, so they will also become a part of regular Russian conventional forces, and they will have to follow the orders of not so genius Russian officers and generals. Which basically means the impact of even this entire 5,000 Wagner force might be insignificant after all. So let's see. Or maybe, just maybe, the Ministry of Defense of Russia will want to erase Wagner completely. That is why they will force them on their dead-end missions. So if you don't want to miss any of these events whenever they start to happen, I will be here to report on them as soon as possible. Just please consider subscribing to my channel. It only takes one click. Thank you so much to all my patrons for your support, and see you tomorrow.